All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of Make More webinar. This is Ruth Buchanan coming to you live from Florida Mix in beautiful downtown Orlando. We are excited to bring to you today our very first session on artificial intelligence, AI. We're so excited. This is a wonderful material that Ernie and I had thought about, a couple of months ago. And we're so excited to bring it to you this first session. So what we're going to do today is I will go ahead and go through a couple of slides. And then we'll introduce Ernie to you, and then Ernie will introduce David, and then David will go ahead and present his carefully, thoughtfully put together presentation to maximize our learning for today on AI for industry, navigating policy, ethics, and innovation. And then after that, we will have the Q&A. And we're very aggressive in packing this all in an hour, but we've done before, so we're going to go ahead and do that again. So welcome again. So this is our session on AI for industry. And we are going to be segueing to, let's see. Oh, where's my slide, Miss Teresa? Go ahead and, yes. So the Make More initiative. Make More is, our goal is to elevate the state's manufacturing sector and demonstrate its impact on the economy. We are Florida Makes. And how do we achieve this? We bring together all our stakeholders. We brainstorm and how we can go back to our communities and apply what we learned today. And we don't really try to reinvent the wheel because we learn from one another. So we can duplicate, replicate, expand, and amplify each other's voices, programs, and initiatives. So that's the Make More program. As far as Florida Makes, our mission is to improve the productivity and technological performance of Florida's manufacturing sector. And our vision is to be the recognized leader for strengthening and advancing Florida's manufacturing sector. Next slide. And how do we help manufacturers? These are some key bullets that we like to share with you. We are helping our manufacturers with their technology acceleration and innovation. We are also at the forefront of helping you with cybersecurity and intellectual property, because that's important. We're very strong in supply chain optimization. We have staff that do this. Last time we talked about Connect, so hopefully you all were there. If not, we can send you the information. Very, very strong in performance assessment and continuous improvement. We have a whole team that is behind this, helping our manufacturers at the ground level. And of course, workforce training is very important, right, in development. That's actually Ernie's role there as well. And then business growth and financial services, where I come from, is in the entrepreneurship and helping businesses grow. So those are key bullets as Florida Makes. Today, we will set the expectation of what we hope you will take away from today's session. So number one is the regulatory compliance and fostering innovation. David will share with you how to understand policy frameworks governing AI right now in adoption in manufacturing, because it's crucial for ensuring your compliance and also fostering innovation. Then there's the ethical and sustainability component of AI implementation. David has some wonderful material about that. And then very important is real-world insights and best practices. We also prepared some information for you on that one. So these are our three key takeaways for today. At this point, I will go ahead. Next slide, please, Ms. Patricia. So today, our key speaker is David Hatami, but it's my pleasure to introduce to you my partner in crime. Thank you, Ernie, for being with me in this journey. Executive Director of FLATE, Florida Advanced Technology Education, to talk about a little bit about FLATE and then introduce David. Ernie?
Yeah, thank you, Ruth, and thanks again for everybody for being here. Next slide, please. Okay, real quick. So as Ruth mentioned, she talked about what Florida Makes does, and they work mostly with the industry side, and FLATE is a part of Florida Makes, and we focus on the education side. So our mission is to drive Florida's world-class manufacturing workforce education and training. We support both educators and industry. You can see on the right-hand side, there's on the slide, we focus on curriculum reform, outreach and student recruitment, educator professional development, and technician education research. So we work all over the state to help create new programs, work with school districts, state colleges, universities, just to find any resources that are available to in education that's available for manufacturing. And so we also support the manufacturers. We provide information about manufacturing related programs. We connect companies to colleges and career technical education and high school programs. We connect to colleges and state universities for subject matter experts, and we support manufacturing outreach events, including Manufacturing Month, which hopefully you all know is coming up in October. And I think we'll put a link to another webinar that Teresa and Daniele from FLATE are going to do to highlight some of the resources that FLATE has available to support Manufacturing Month. Next slide, please. So this is just a list of some of the resources. If you go to flate.org, flate.org, you can find links to these others. But FLATE over the last 20 years has created many resources that can help you if you want to outreach to the community, or if you want to do any kind of event related to education or outreach. Please get a hold of us, and we'll help you create whatever event is necessary or valuable in your community. All right, next slide, please. All right, great. Well, this is really why we're all here today. It's my pleasure to introduce David Hatami, an AI ethicist. David is an educational consultant and expert in online education with a philosopher's heart. His expansive 20+ year career traverses the realms of teaching, advising, artificial intelligence, student management, higher education administration, online education, pedagogy, and curriculum development. David will earn his doctorate of education later this year, so congratulations on that, David. David has solidified his career niche in the burgeoning domain of AI policy and AI ethics. In both K-12 and higher education and in industry. With the recent formation of his educational consultancy, edupolicy.ai, and Scholar Bar Education, LLC. He advocates for forward-thinking policy frameworks, which are uniquely tailored for the dynamics of K-12, higher education, and industry. His holistic approach is informed by direct hands-on involvement across the spectrum of higher education roles. David has developed an extraordinary gift of bringing stakeholders from every industry together to foster educational excellence through his strategic implementation of personality, policy, rapport technology, and data-driven methodologies. His proficiency as an expert in faculty management and online pedagogy, policy development, and the cultivation of education relationships positions him as a thought leader at the forefront of academic leadership of the 21st century. His insatiable appetite for learning, coupled with his enthusiasm for cross-sector collaboration, cements his role as a catalyst for educational innovation and advancement. David's book, called Rethinking Approaches to AI Policy and AI Ethics in K-12 and higher education, is the embodiment of a commitment to revolutionize education for the digital age. So whether you want to partner on the education side, or your company is perhaps looking to invest in AI policies and education at your company, David would be a great resource. So it is my pleasure to hand this presentation off to David.
Thank you, Ernie. I really appreciate that. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. First of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ernie. Thank you, Ruth. I just wanted to take a minute to thank FLATE, and I wanted to thank Florida Makes for the opportunity to be here today. It's my absolute pleasure to be here to speak to, CEOs and, those in the industry of industry. For me, this has been, a really interesting journey. And, I was at a dinner party last week, and somebody asked me, what do you do? And I said, I'm an AI ethicist. I said, how do you become an AI ethicist? And I said, you have to read about ethics a lot, and you just have to really love it. And, I'm very passionate about this topic because I feel very strongly, and it really is important to us. We got social media wrong about 20 years ago, and we cannot afford to get AI ethics wrong as we move into the 21st century. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my PowerPoint here, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and see, share my screen. Bear with me. Oh. Hold on. Oh, what am I supposed to do? Where's it go? I had it. Nope, it's not it. Where's my PowerPoint?
As David is putting on his presentation, just a little bit of additional background for everybody. So there are 3 portions to David's presentation. There's a lot of really high concepts. So we're gonna try our best to summarize each little section for you.
I apologize about this. It was just there.
Yeah, we just practiced this. So let me know if I need to show mine, David.
I can have it in a moment here. I'm sorry about that.
Right. No worries, no worries. So like I said, and also this may be a good time to remind everyone to get your questions ready. Ernie and me and the team, by the way, there's a whole team behind us, so we're very fortunate. We'll be monitoring the chat and the questions. I think we're doing mostly on chat, right, Teresa? The questions or Patricia, the questions are going to be in the chat.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So feel free to put it in.
I should be up.
All right, here we go. Yes.
I'm so sorry about that.
No worries. No worries.
Like I just had them up.
Take it away, David. Yeah, no, we're good. Okay.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to kind of skip a couple slides there. But to talk about the agenda real fast, Ruth had already covered it. Understanding compliance, ethical AI implementation, and real world insights. So, when we're talking about AI, I like to get past. I like to start with just a smidge of philosophy. And people are like, philosophy? We're talking about AI. Well, if we think about it, we have created essentially a digital brain. And, if you go back to the time of Aristotle, when his primary canons were ethos, pathos, and logos. And these all had to do with the constructs of communication. Well, if you think about it, many people may not know this, but in higher education over the last, probably 5-10 years, there's been a lot of cuts in humanities programs, liberal arts programs, what have you. But recently, the CEOs of all of these tech companies are coming back and they're calling for a renewal of liberal arts and of classical thinking in terms of the study of it, because they recognize the correlation between AI and a liberal arts education and the thought process that goes into a liberal arts education. I found that really fascinating, and it kind of really solidified for me that we are in essence creating a digital brain that really, and if you want to argue whether can these digital brains think or not, that's a totally different conversation, but it's certainly an interesting philosophical conversation. But I just wanted to touch on that. And then I wanted to now I want to get back to a little bit about AI in manufacturing, but we'll talk about philosophy later. So, when we're in industry, I think the one question that everybody asks themselves is, what can AI do for me? Why should I take the time to do this and, invest in this and learn about this? And I would argue that is probably not the right question. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, what problem are we trying to solve? Because that is what AI is really good at. It is good at solving very specific problems that have a very narrow focus. Rather than a broad, what can it do for me? We need to remember to ask ourselves, what problem can this solve for us? Now, the manufacturing segment has a lot of problems, and they go in a lot of different directions, and they relate to many different topics that are all interrelated, whether it's shortages in the labor market, whether it's supply chain disruptions, whether products need to be innovated, whether we have to get to net zero, right? These are all trends that are emerging in the 2024 market. And while we understand a lot of, how this, of what we need to do, there's also a lot that we don't know what we don't know. And that's kind of part of what makes this really kind of challenging for all of us, even those of us that spend a lot of time, thinking about these problems, who understand AI technology really well, who understand how to apply technology really well. There's always that unknown factor because technology is advancing so quickly that we don't really know. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what problems are going to come around the corner. We don't know what new iteration of software of AI, the next generation that's going to come out to solve, say, another problem that we weren't able to solve yesterday. So that's why it's so interesting and there's so much work to be done. Statement. So, what are some of the issues that it affects, right? When it comes to regulatory compliance, these are the topics that matter to, to industry. How can it help me solve my problems? Well, AI does things like real-time data collection and analysis. It can generate compliance reports. It can detect, potential violations or issues in your manufacturing processes. The technology is really good for spotting very specific problems. But what we need to understand is, how do we harness that technology so that we can actually make it work for us? Now, most organizations and institutions of higher education, they sort of have this attitude of AI. It's like, well, once they've decided that they want to adapt and adopt it, they're like, all right, let's go. They get the coders, they get the programmers, they start, actually deciding they're going to implement a system. They start putting together their chatbot, they start putting together all of these things. And then they usually run into problems after they've already started this huge investment of time and money to build platforms that have issues. And here's what I'm talking about. The problem, what we're trying to avoid here, is preventing that. So I would urge, leaders of industry to, while everybody recognizes the significance of staying ahead of the competition and of, moving ahead to, cut costs and to increase profits, to do what we need to do. But I urge everybody, go slow to go fast. What does that mean? That means take your time when it comes to, actually developing your AI, because there's several reasons for it. One, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit later, but what we need to make sure we do is that we predicate our implementations on a sound policy. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. What is a policy? A policy is the rules of engagement that, when you're actually creating your policy, you're creating the guardrails upon which your AI implementation is going to work. We also need to talk about ethics, right? So ethics is simply the moral code by which the users of AI technology will actually use the implementation and abide by the policy or the rules that we've created. So with all that in mind, things that it can do to affect regulatory compliance, and this is just some of the issues, and I'm sure you could probably name many more right off the top of your head, but AI can help with things like quality control, supply chain management, and so many other things when we are working with these systems. But we need to make sure that we actually get these systems set up right before we start going into actual implementation. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ernie and Ruth as we go into, and then I'll talk about the next segment in a little bit, in segment 2 in a little bit. Stop my share.
So thank you for that prompt, David. So at that point, that is the first segment of David's presentation today on AI for industry. So it's very important to have those guardrails when you're putting together your policy, because as he said, this is too important for us not to at least take a moment to think about it. And that moral code that he presented is very important And to our manufacturers, you know, on a day-to-day, it's real-time data collection and analysis. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? I mean, many of you are already doing that, but with AI assisting you, that makes it even more effective, and then help your business decision making as well. So that's how I'm going to wrap up that section. David, we're doing good on time. Go ahead and start your segment number 2, please.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Perfect. So when we are implementing, let me turn off the spotlight. Yeah. When we are implementing AI, there are, and we've realized that we need to create our policy first. Okay, this is always going to be your first step in this process. There's multiple levels of awareness when it comes to an AI policy. It is, and it's just like a classic onion. If you start from the outside, it starts all the way from non-responsible AI, meaning we're just going to do whatever, it's okay, we're going to do our thing, and we don't really care how it's used. And this is where problems happen. I know there's cases in large scale industry and manufacturing. Companies like Samsung have had real problems. Many years ago, there's a really famous case study where their employees, when it came out, just started putting their reports into OpenAI because they're like, oh, well, this can help me write my report, and this is great. But what they didn't realize is that confidential information that was being placed into OpenAI to help that one employee in some segment of the company, it was actually being fed and trained. The OpenAI was training on that information, learning it, and incorporating it into the algorithm and the information that it would share with other companies who were running similar queries. Sony and Microsoft started picking up on the information that Samsung had put into OpenAI. So when we talk about guardrails, what that means is there is when you're implementing that AI policy, you need to make sure that there are rules, that there's things that you're not allowed to put into the guardrail, or you need to have a closed LLM or large language model that isn't going to bleed out into a mainstream database where your proprietary information can be outsourced to anyone else who puts in a query that would match that answer. So this is why we need to make sure that we're careful of it. Awareness. We're aware that there's a problem, or we're aware that, okay, there's this thing that an AI policy, or we know something we need to do. And then there's the next level of, we're only doing this because everybody says we should do this, and we're just being compliant. So we're just doing what we're supposed to be doing, but our heart's not really in it. It's kind of like when I asked my 14-year-old to take out the garbage. He only does it because I'm making him do it, not because he really wants to do it. And then we have ethical integration. These are the organizations that recognize, you know what, this is something that we need to do it, and we're going to do it with the right attitude for the right reason. And then robust governance structure. These are the organizations that take it very seriously, that build it into their actual, the structure and the hierarchy of the organization. Institutionalized is where everybody understands that this is their job, their function in the usage of AI. And then there's leadership, or the gold standard in AI, or ethical AI. So these are the levels that I like to share with organizations, so they kind of get an understanding that there are levels of this, and it takes time to work through this process to get there. So, and this again is just that governance structure that I talked about. I'm going to kind of move on from that slide. Now, what is the difference between AI policy and AI ethics? I know I kind of briefly touched on it, but I want to explore it just a little more, because what I find is, in many cases, it is kind of, the terms are sort of used interchangeably, and there's not really a distinction between the semantics of the vocabulary. And I think it's important that we understand specifically what we're talking about and why it's relevant. So it's very simple. It's very straightforward. An AI policy simply refers to the formal regulations, the guidelines, and the framework that are established by an organization or an institution that govern the deployment and the development and the use of AI technologies. So it basically is your code of rules that you use, your guardrails, if you will. That's the term of art that's industry standard. You put guardrails in place to make sure that your information is not going somewhere that it's not supposed to. That it, we all understand the significance of data privacy and data security. Just ask any company that's been hacked where they've had the private information of millions of consumers, whether it's passwords or credit card numbers. So we all understand that it's really important that we have a strong and firm stance on a policy regarding the usage of AI in our organization, because it only takes one employee to start developing all kinds of issues. There's all kinds of risk factors that are involved with this. Now, AI ethics, right? Ethics, they simply refer to the set of moral principles and value that guide the development, deployment, and use of AI. And that's exactly what we're talking about here today. And, that kind of goes with my title, AI ethicist. I guide companies and organizations and academic institutions on building and developing a policy, and also guide them on implementing an ethical program or ethical set of standards for their employees, for their stakeholders, regardless of where they are in the institution. It could be a staff member, it could be in the C-suite, it doesn't matter. Everybody is equally responsible to maintain an ethical stance, a moral stance on how they use the technology. Now, I know that for most individuals in this room, AI is probably nothing new. I'm sure that many of you are very well versed in, the specifics of how it can help your institution, your organization. Many of you, I'm sure, are already using AI on some level to automate. Anybody, if has any form of automation, it's a form of AI. And it's wonderful. It allows us, it frees up the human capital to do other tasks that have more meaning. But those same human stakeholders need to make sure that they are conducting themselves within the highest realms of ethical standards. So, here's just, again, a little bit more detail. I'm not going to go into it too much, but, fairness and bias, making sure that the systems are fair, right? We need to make sure that as organizations, we're transparent, that we're accountable, that we're protecting privacy, that, we have, safety and security in mind, that we have a human-centered design, and that we're inclusive. So, I just want to stress here that an ethical organization is the kind of organization that employees want to work for, especially in an era where there is a fight for really good talent in the market, when we're trying to retain good talent. It is a big deal. In fact, I just put a post out yesterday on LinkedIn that pertains to this exact topic, that companies who implement AI policies and AI ethical programs and offer transparency with that are the ones that build trust with their stakeholders. And I can't emphasize that enough. People want to work for responsible organizations. So there's a lot of reasons to do this, not only from a legal or risk mitigation perspective, but also just from the perspective of building a culture where there is fairness and transparency and accountability. So kind of just to summarize that, what is ethical AI? It's an AI system that is fair, transparent, and accountable. What that means is there's not what they call a quote unquote black box, where nobody really understands why these decisions are being made. Nobody likes that. Everybody wants to be a part of that process, so they understand it. But, in all fairness, there is a way to do this that is fair to the organization and also fair to the stakeholders, whether it be your employees, your staff. And it's designed to be the way that I like to design programs for, an ethical, both from the policy and the ethics perspective, is we have a blanket policy, an overreaching umbrella for an organization, but then each individual department has their own specific policy. And there's two reasons for that. One, we want to make sure that we get the benefit of whatever AI can do for that department. And every department's going to be different. How HR uses AI and AI implementation is going to be different than the logistics department, than the scheduling department, than the transportation department. And they're each going to get a different benefit of it. But we also, and the second piece of that is they each have access to different pieces of information. Not every department has access to all of the databases, to all of the information. So we need to make sure that there are guardrails that regulate what individuals are able to access in terms of, both internally in your organization and externally outside of your organization's, I'll use the term firewall, but your large language model that is a part of your organization. So obviously, ethical AI aligns with human values, right? Because as I alluded to earlier, people want to work for ethically responsible organizations. It makes them want to stay there longer, and it builds trust with your employee stakeholders. And it also affects society at large. It affects both on the individual and societal levels. Earlier, I kind of touched on it when I just started that we messed up social media 20 years ago, right? Can you imagine what would have happened if people could have been trained on the proper use of social media when it came out? Do you think of all the societal issues that we could have avoided or at least mitigated, if nothing else? All the cyberbullying could have been put to, it could have been reduced. There would have been less harmful effects of social media. And don't get me wrong, social media is an amazing tool. It offers us a lot of benefits. And I very much see AI in the same positioning that it can really do wonderful things for us as a society. But we also need to be careful and make sure that we use it responsibly. Because I stress this, intent doesn't really matter. Whether an individual accidentally does something incorrect that causes a problem, or if it's done with a nefarious intention, that's less relevant than the fact that it actually happened. Our goal is to make sure that these things just don't happen, that we can actually control and have a sense of positive value for everything that we do with our AI systems. Ruth, how are we doing on time, by the way? Because I know I had some limited segments here.
No, you're good. Keep going.
Okay, perfect. All right. So again, this sort of kind of everything that I've said underscores the need for sound AI governance, because as leaders of industry, it is our responsibility to make sure that everything we do helps our organization, grow and advance, that we're responsible for our stakeholders, and making sure that, they understand what this process looks like, why this process exists. Many times I'll recommend that, when you're going through this procedure of implementing a policy, that we incorporate a voice from all levels, all stakeholders. In higher education, for example, I advocate for a student voice, a faculty voice, and an administrator voice when determining an AI policy. In the case of industry, obviously there are, different stakeholders at different levels. And, I would definitely encourage a percentage, from all different levels. And it's going to vary from organization to organization. So I'm going to say this kind of in a general sense, you have an employee voice, and then you have an administrator or C-level voice in terms of what it is that we're looking to do. I really can't stress the adoption of a policy that takes everybody's thoughts into opinion. And here's why. Because if you don't, if you just decide these are the rules, that's it, this is what we're doing, perhaps, they'll go along with the rules, but what we really need is buy-in. We really need our stakeholders to buy into what we're doing and really understand why we're doing it so that it's done with the right attitude and the right intention so that we can move ourselves closer through that onion that I talked about earlier to the gold standard, or an organization that really understands sound ethical AI practices. This is the benefit of governance. Now, here's the caveat, and this is what makes it so interesting. I also alluded earlier that we don't know what we don't know, right? So what happens when Microsoft or OpenAI, they come out with a new version of AI or a new update that does something that we couldn't do yesterday? All of a sudden, or somebody in your organization comes up with a novel idea or a novel application for a pre-existing problem. Well, we have to be able to adjust on the fly. Otherwise, what happens is it's just going to create one incident over another, and then it creates panic and it creates a sort of internal turmoil where everybody feels like the sky is falling down. And what we need to do is work to avoid that. We need to work so that we have a centralized process for making changes as the technology advances and changes, so that, as we recognize a change, as we recognize patterns, we simply are able to adapt because we already have the mechanisms in place. And I would ask you, what's critical, in your organization? That's the questions to start thinking about for yourself. All right, so to talk about some of the potentially positive benefits, this is a really great little matrix because it really kind of, adds some clarity. So, we have the larger bucket in the category, we have a subcategory. So enhanced decision making, right? We can get data-driven insights and predictive analytics. We're all familiar with these, so this certainly isn't new. But utilizing AI to take your existing insights, your existing information, your existing analytics, and leverage it to help predict trends has a lot of value from an organizational level. It also helps with decision support systems, okay, right? So what are the tools, the toolbox that we're using to help with those predictive analysis and those data-driven insights, okay? Strategic planning. I can't stress strategic planning enough. In fact, it's a topic that I love talking about, especially when it comes to AI. And I always kind of I love talking about it because it really is the thing that can set most organizations apart. It's how an organization can become a disruptor. As a small player can disrupt a large playing field, through a strategic plan. There's lots of examples in business. One of my favorites is Southwest Airlines. They were a small carrier, but they actually managed to disrupt the entire aviation industry by offering something different in terms of the routes and the hubs that they offered. They were short point to point? That's the term I'm looking for. Hubs instead of these long hauls or to all major airports. They were the first one to really start traveling to those smaller airports. And because they did that as a strategic decision, they were able to disrupt the aviation industry. And, they didn't have the luxury of having AI, but, your organization certainly will, in terms of helping you to develop some strategy pieces for moving, your organization in the right way. Operational efficiencies. Man, this is a big one. We've already got operations in place. We've already got, our processes down. But what happens if we can reduce the amount of time that it takes to produce what it is that we produce? What happens if we can utilize our existing resources to get more out of the same resources? What if we changed our workforce or the workflow, excuse me, and we're able to get more product for less money? If we could reduce our costs, then what, right? So operational efficiency is a huge piece of what AI can offer an organization, um, all utilizing technology that exists. But I can't stress it enough. You have to use the technology correctly and not be afraid to go slow to go fast. Because it's like I said at the beginning, everybody is in a race to implement AI technology. And once they do it, then usually I would say 8 times out of 10, about 80% of the cases, what happens is they realize that they start to have some ethical issues, like, oh, I'm not sure if that's really a good idea, or the AI is not, it just isn't doing what it's supposed to do, or it's just not, this isn't organized correctly. All of these things matter. So it's worth taking the time to make sure you craft it correctly before you start your implementation. Because remember, your coders, your programmers, your Python coders, what have you, they're going to be able to build whatever you want them to build. That's their expertise, but they're going to do it based on the instructions that you give them. And I highly recommend starting with a good policy and having an ethical program in place before you start that process. So we have, improved outcomes from an educational, and I would change educational to training outcomes. So you have, you can obviously increase the efficacy of your training for, your employees so that everybody can be cross-trained on other pieces of the manufacturing process. You can onboard new employees quicker. You can get them up and running faster, through adaptive assessments, learning analytics, curriculum development. I mean, pedagogy is my wheelhouse. So the training piece and the learning part of this process is very intuitive for me. I've been doing it for almost 25 years now. I can't stress it enough when it comes to the industry as well. So, all of these benefits are there for the taking with a properly implemented AI system. And then ethical leadership. Okay. I highly recommend an ethics committee within each organization. It doesn't have to be huge, but you want to make sure that you have a decent sampling from each of the various departments. You don't have to necessarily get granular in terms of sub-departments, but there has to be some voice coming from different levels of the organization, or you are going to have issues with buy-in. And that's just going to create backlash, which nobody really wants to deal with because everybody has a job that they need to be doing. Compliance. Compliance is huge. Let's talk about it, because compliance just simply means the federal regulations, the state regulations, the local regulations that every industry is subject to making sure that they are adhering to. And while we all do our best, as humans, we make mistakes. Dare I say it, the lawyers can make mistakes too. And it's always good to make sure that you have, that there's some monitoring. There's always something going on. Somebody's watching. You're able to keep a continuous eye on this. Transparency initiatives, okay, making sure that the process is open and understood. Stakeholder engagement, I already talked about. So let's talk a little bit about R&D. So AI absolutely helps with R&D. It creates hubs, right? So everybody can push for innovation. It's amazing the ideas that this technology can come up with. When it first came out, I heard of a particular case study where there was a group, this is like before AI came out, they applied for a grant, they got like $1 million grant and to do research. They developed, the research. And then as time went on, AI started coming out and they started applying this. They tried an experiment where they took this AI technology and entered the exact same set of questions that the humans did. And they basically got the same, if not a better answer on something that they'd been working on for a long time. So, in terms of moving R&D along, it's incredible. And, the opportunities are absolutely amazing. But again, I stress, just do it right. Enhanced research, obviously, research funding, different ways to help you build these systems, collaborative projects, working through, collaborating with different departments, utilizing AI is a whole lot easier. Let's talk about competitive advantage. Okay. You can become a leader and in terms of developing, whatever it is that you do, use the ethics and use the policies to help you have what I call the philosophical keystone that was back on that philosophy slide. I kind of jumped through it there a little bit because I thought I didn't have time, but institutional differentiation, be innovative, be different. It'll allow your organization to start to set the stage, to start to differentiate themselves from others in your industry who are not using AI. Brand enhancement, strengthen your brand, attract talent. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Manufacturing and industry, there are so many challenges. For this webinar, I did a fair amount of research on the manufacturing industry, just trying to understand from the perspective of your perspective as the viewer, who runs and owns manufacturing organizations. There's so many challenges, and it's really amazing the work that you do, because there are so many different, as they say, balls in the air. It's all at the same time, trying to keep everything going. And I know talent is a big deal. I've been in the recruiting industry, kind of ancillary, as well as higher education. I know this space really well, and finding the right people on what's the saying? The Good to Great book. It's get the right people on the right bus, in the right seat on the right day. So that's really what we're after here. So I think this is a good segment here. Ruth, do you want me to send it back to you now for a little bit? Are there any questions that I can answer at this point?
No, it's good. I think the audience are soaking up your material, David. Go ahead and don't you have a slide about after that in challenges in implementing ethical AI? Do you still have that one?
I do.
Yeah, let's do that quickly.
Oh, that slide we talked about earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did we already do that? Okay.
No, we didn't do it. We didn't do it. Hang on. I see a raised hand.
The raised hand, you can go ahead and put your put your comment in there. And so as David said, so we have 11 minutes, David, for the total webinar. So I just want to remind everybody, this was a class on AI ethics and policy. So what we're hearing here is that, as a team, as a manufacturer and people in industry, it really is important to plan whatever it is your policy and program will be, and then also to involve your team, right? David, you said that so many times. And I love the fact that you said leaders need to be involved. And so that is key. And I love that, it's just like everything. Everybody needs to be involved, invested, and integrated into the entire system in order to have a successful implementation of AI. Patricia, you have your hand up, so go ahead and message us internally if you need to say something for us. And so that, folks, is the second segment. We're going to go ahead and go to the third segment. Let's spend about 5 minutes on that, David, as far as real-world insight and best practices. There's some very good stuff here. So go ahead, David, and do segment 3, please.
Okay, perfect. All right, bear with me here. All right. Can everybody see my screen okay? All right. So, kind of recapping a little bit what I talked about. So the key principles of ethical AI, You need to make sure that we're fair and non-discriminatory. So when I talk about this, I'm talking about when we're building our large language model, when we're building our AI chatbot. I'll use that term kind of generically. There's certain parts of the algorithm that it's been called to attention that there's a great case study where when AI first started coming out, so Amazon wanted to use it as a recruitment tool. So they fed a large language model 10,000 resumes and said, pick the perfect candidate. And you know who it selected as the perfect candidate? It was a lacrosse player from Wisconsin named Jared. And, so it's kind of a joke because, obviously it wasn't the perfect candidate. So, when we're building these models, we need to make sure that it's done correctly and that it's, doing what we want it to do. When it comes to fairness, and non-discrimination, that simply refers to the types of answers that it's going to give, that make sure that it's taking everything into account in a reasonable way, that it's not being biased towards a particular gender or a particular race or a particular it doesn't have an affinity to whatever. And it's again, it seems kind of esoteric if you really stop and think about it, but there needs to be a sort of neutrality in terms of the way that these large language models do their job. I talked about transparency, explainability, making sure that we can actually understand why it did what it did, and that stakeholders, especially for larger decisions, can kind of understand these decisions. Privacy is huge, data protection is huge. Those are pretty self-explanatory. Accountability and responsibility, again, fairly self-explanatory. Safety and security, in other words, making sure that we're doing everything right. These are all the reasons that we want to make sure that we are spending the time to go slow, to go fast. Make sure that we have a sound policy in place. Make sure that our stakeholders understand and have been through an ethical training program, that they get it, that they know how to use the technology correctly. Challenges, again, this is what I've been talking about. It's pretty much the same thing. I'm just going to jump right here to regulatory and compliance. We need to make sure that the AI technology is compliant, that it's not telling you or suggesting to do something that is contrary to a federal, state, or local regulation. And again, that's going to be different with every industry, every manufacturing organization. Balancing innovation and ethical AI considerations simply refers to the fact that the technology exists and we have to balance it with doing what we need to do. It's kind of a generic term, but if I'm just kind of simplifying it. So doing it right. And then real world insight. Again, I'm just going to kind of skip through this. This actually is I'm going to skip through this because this is sort of like the more detailed version of what happens when you don't, right? So there's lawsuits, you could be non-compliant with regulations, you could be violating privacy, there's privacy concerns, systems. These are everything that I've already explained. So I kind of went ahead of myself a little bit. Covered this, a lot of this stuff. I'm gonna cover this one because I know it's important. Ruth and I had talked about this one. Data breaches, right? I think that's a really important topic. And I think even though I touched on it earlier, I want to say it again because everybody understands how significant it is. If your data is breached, if your security is breached, nobody likes that. It causes a lot of problems, a lot of headaches. And let's be honest, it's probably a really expensive mistake. So we need to do everything that we can to avoid that. People who have nefarious intent and understand how to manipulate the systems, making sure that we have protocols in place to make sure that our AI frameworks aren't susceptible to these kinds of attacks, cyber attacks, hacks, system manipulation. They're all kind of this different ways of talking about the same thing, but making sure that we do it right is the bottom line. And then I cause this, as a worst case scenario, reputational damage. and loss of public trust. You know, our reputations are everything. You know, whether you're in higher education, whether you're in industry, whether you're in legal, it doesn't matter who you are, your reputation means everything, because if your reputation is damaged, if your brand is damaged, it's very hard to pick up the pieces and move forward. It's not to say it's impossible, but it's not easy. And so these are, you know, some of the reasons that really, you know, beyond everything else that I've talked about, if you do it for no other reason, you know, implementing a policy, make sure that you're protecting your brand, you don't have reputational damage, you're not dealing with a public backlash, excuse me, you don't want to be canceled, as they say, losing consumer trust in your products, losing, you know, the trust of your clients and your client base. You don't want it to cause media problems, or you're getting reports from, you know, Channel 5, Channel 10, whatever, you know, talking about the breach or talking about, you know, the organization that had problems. You don't want to be that company. Nobody wants that. And these are all reasons that you want to make sure that you're taking these steps. And this kind of talks a little bit about the environmental and societal impacts. I covered those. You know, and I'll pause for a moment and I'll ask you, can your organization afford any of those scenarios? Probably not. Nobody likes it. Nobody wants it. So let's make sure that it doesn't happen. You know, I took the time to, I researched trends for 24, and, you know, some of these are the trends that you guys are talking that are top of your mind. You know, whether it's talent, whether it's, you know, new digital technologies, whether it's streamlining your factories, supply chain management and logistics, manufacturing, you know, has so many challenges. And, you know, I am at your service to help you, you know, figure out these problems as you go through your challenges up and down. You know, I guess I'll take any questions if there's questions at this point. Ruth, are we good on time? I can turn it back to you.
No, thank you so much, David. So folks, this slide here that David just showed, the key trends, you will get a copy of that as we share with you David's PowerPoint. This is very important as you think about what to do next. And so, Ernie, did you want to say a little something at this point? And then I will, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks again, David. I'd also want to give a big shout out to people behind the scenes, Teresa, Connor, and Patricia, who are making this happen behind the scenes. But thanks again, David. I know we're just about out of time. Great presentation, good information. And if people want to contact David to implement this in their companies, certainly he's available for that. Back to you, Ruth.
Right. Yeah. So we did not have time for Q&A because we knew there was a lot of content in David's presentation. Like I said, we will share that with you. Teresa or Patricia, could you please share my screen, the couple of slides that we will do okay, so just to wrap it up, everybody, thank you again for attending. So these were the key takeaways today. We talked about regulatory compliance and how will that foster the innovation in your organization, particularly your manufacturing attending the session today. This was not a class on tools. You probably already noticed that. We were going high on this one. So these are the fundamental thinking and philosophy and laying down the foundation for your company as you go about you know, being AI compliant or AI ready. So there's a regulatory compliance, and David spent quite a bit of time, which we asked him to, on what is ethical and sustainable AI. I mean, he said it well. He said, you know, go slow so you can go fast. That's very important. So I hope you will take that. If there's one thing you take from today, that's one. And then the real world insight and best practices. Once you get to the slide later, you can review more the was it the Deloitte & Touche study that David had shared with us. That is very, very good thing to keep in mind. So is there another slide there for me, Patricia or Teresa? Oh yeah, very important. So as part of Florida Makes, we encourage you, our manufacturers and our partners, stakeholders at the local level, please direct your manufacturers to engage with our regional manufacturer associations, and they are there in that slide, and that QR code will point you to the webpage, because that's how we help our manufacturers together with you, the stakeholders in the call. We want to make sure that we help them with their technology adoption and everything else that helps rise the manufacturing industry in the state of Florida. Is there another slide, or is that it for us? All right, well, thank you all for staying with us. You guys are great. You have stayed through the whole hour. We hope you took some good information. Like I said, we will share David's PowerPoint with everybody, thanking the people behind the scenes, like Ernie said, that make this happen. You all are amazing. Thank you, Ernie, for being part of the team. And thank you, David, of course, for sharing your insight, your knowledge, your talent, and expertise. And he's there to help you guys for follow-up questions again, as I said. All right, so this is Ruth Buchanan on behalf of the Make More team and Florida Makes. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.